Death is an important interest, especially to an aging person. A categorical question is being put to him, and he is under an obligation to answer it. To this end, he ought to have a myth about death, for reason shows him nothing but the dark pit into which he is descending. Myth, however, can conjure up other images for him, helpful and enriching pictures of life in the land of the dead. If he believes in them, or grates them with some measure of credence, he is being just as right or just as wrong as someone who does not believe in them. But while the man who despairs marches toward nothingness, the one who has placed his faith in the archetype follows the tracks of life and lives right into his death. Both, to be sure, remain in uncertainty, but the one lives against his instincts, the other with them. Jung, 1959. Death is psychologically as important as birth, and like it, is an integral part of life. As a doctor, I make every effort to strengthen the belief in immortality, especially with older patients when such questions come threateningly close. For seen in correct psychological perspective, death is not an end but a goal, and life's inclination towards death begins as soon as the meridian is passed. Jung, 1957. The analysis of older people provides a wealth of dream symbols that psychically prepare the dreams for impending death. It is in fact true, as Jung has emphasized, that the unconscious psyche pays very little attention to the abrupt end of bodily life and behaves as if the psychic life of the individual, that is, the individuation process, will simply continue. The unconscious believes, quite obviously, in a life after death. Marie-Louise von Franz, 1987. The title of this essay is most likely strange, if not indecent, to the current reader. With our American emphasis on youth and our medical system viewing death as an enemy to be overcome, we do not regard death as an art or something to be attempted well. Given our culture's profound materialism, with its emphasis on the concrete, the body, and the physical plane, few people think about death beyond shuddering at the possibility. However, Carl Jung was far smarter than modern American culture. He realized that death is unavoidable, and that to believe otherwise is to live in denial. More than just denial, it entails going against one's instincts, as stated in the first quote. Rather of ignoring or denying death, Jung proposes viewing it as a goal, the destination of the second half of life's journey. Just as we gather our belongings and pack for a trip, we must prepare for our journey into death. The focus of this essay is on what these preparations entail, how Jung came to establish his beliefs about this topic, how Jung advises we regard death, and what a good dying means. Jung on myth, or what dying preparations should contain. Jung mentions in the first statement that older people should have a death myth. A myth is one of the goods Jung felt we should pack on our voyage into death. Because most Americans associate the term myth with false story or untrue tale, we must emphasize that this is not how Jung defined myth. Myths are original revelations of the preconscious psyche, involuntary statements about unconscious psychic happenings, and anything but allegories of physical processes, Jung said in his exploration of archetypes and the collective unconscious. Such allegories would be a waste of time for a non-scientific mind. Myths, on the other hand, have a crucial meaning. Myths have significant importance because they connect us to the transcendent and infinite, and they help us reconnect with the archetypal core of our nature. They carry psychic values and are animate images that symbolically replicate energies within us. Daryl Sharp, a Jungian therapist, defines myth as an involuntary collective statement based on an unconscious psychic experience. Revelations, preconscious, involuntary, unconscious. By this point, you, the reader, may be wondering how you can follow Jung's recommendation, in the first statement above, to have a myth about death. How can we have a myth about anything if myth is something we don't create with our rational thoughts, if it is automatic and unconscious? This is not something we do. It is something that happens to us. The psyche creates our myths, which we then experience through monitoring our psychic life, including our dreams, intuitions, flashes of insight, and synchronicities, outside life occurrences that appear as meaningful coincidences. Jung's statement on the duty of the second half of life reminds us that as we become older, we need to pay greater attention to our mental lives and the insights they provide about our final destination. Marie-Louise von Franz recognized how elderly people's dreams create these insights through her work with older patients, so observing your dreams is a wonderful method to create a death myth. With the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying, Raymond Moody on the near-death experience, Stephen Levine on conscious dying, and the advent of the hospice movement in recent decades, another outer life way to nurture the development of this myth has opened up. These and other people's publications essays, lobbying efforts, and workshops have legitimized the debate of what was formerly a taboo subject in our culture. In addition to the many books on death and dying, there are dozens of accounts in print on near-death experiences, NDEs, including Jung's own in 1944, Jung's personal experience. When Jung agreed to write a memoir in the last 4 years of his life, he included a chapter on one of the most significant experiences of his life, the visions that followed his near-fatal heart attack. Jung envisioned himself high up in space as he hung on the edge of death, from where he could see the blue globe of Earth and the Indian subcontinent. He spotted a gigantic granite block floating in space which held a temple while he floated in space. Jung reached the temple's steps and then encountered a strange thing. I got the sensation that everything was being sloughed away. Everything I aimed at, yearned for, or thought, the entire phantasmagoria of earthly existence, was falling away or being torn from me, an excruciatingly painful process. Nonetheless, something remained. It was as if I now carried everything I had ever experienced or done, everything that had transpired around me, with me. I might also say that it was with me, and that I was it. So to speak, I was made up of everything. I was made up of my own past, and I was certain, this is who I am. This event gave me a sense of acute poverty while also providing me with a sense of enormous abundance. There was nothing I wanted or sought anymore. I existed objectively. I was who I had been and what I had lived. At first, there was a sense of destruction, or of having been stripped or pillaged, but this quickly faded. Everything appeared to have passed. There was no longer any regret that something had been lost or taken away. On the contrary, I possessed everything that made me who I was. As I approached the temple, I was positive that I was going to enter a glowing room and meet all those people to whom I truly belong. There, I'd finally comprehend what historical nexus I or my life fit into. I'd figure out why I'd come into existence and where my life was going. An image floated up from below, towards the direction of Europe. It was my physician. We had a silent exchange of thoughts as he stood in front of me. The Earth had assigned Dr. H to send a message to me, informing me that there was a protest against my departure. I had no right to leave the planet and had to come back. My eyesight went black the moment I heard that. Jung felt intense disappointment at not being allowed to continue on, to cross over into the hereafter, as is customary in NDEs. He vacillated between life and death for 3 weeks before deciding to live again. Living felt like a prison compared to the freedom he felt in his vision, and returning to the physical world felt like being in the box system. During the day, Jung was unhappy. At night, he was swept up in ecstasy, ineffable happiness, within visions that gave him the feeling of the odor of sanctity, a pneuma of inexpressible sanctity in the room, whose manifestation was the mysterium conjunctionis. The visions became fainter as he healed, until they vanished entirely. Years later, Jung could look back and say, "These were the most incredible things I have ever experienced, not a product of imagination." The images and feelings were completely real. There was nothing subjective about them. They all had an absolute objectivity character to them. They were also life-changing, which is another prevalent element of NDEs. The metamorphosis in Jung's instance took numerous shapes. In terms of his work, he no longer strove to express himself but surrendered himself to the current of my thoughts. Jung no longer attempted to make his writings understandable to the general public. His creations would now correspond to the formulations of the psyche. As a result, most people see Jung's masterworks as dense, meaty stuff that is not easily accessible. More broadly, he saw a transformation in his attitude, from one of self-blame for his accident and heart attack to one of affirmation of things as they are, an unconditional yes to that which is, without subjective protests, acceptance of my own nature, as I happen to be. 13 years after his near-death experience, Jung published a chapter in his memoirs titled On Life After Death. Jung, ever the empiricist, based his opinions on his personal experiences, and so it was here. In the opening of the chapter, Jesus asserts unequivocally that no one can know for definite about the hereafter, because it is one of those things which pass our understanding. Jung understood that his NDE provided him with unforgettable memories, but not conclusive evidence of life beyond death. So Jung turned to story, mythologizing, an activity that, while scientific man dismisses as futile speculation, Jung admits, functions as a healing and valid activity for our emotional nature. Jung based his story about life after death on his recollections of his experience out of body in 1944, as well as hints sent from the unconscious, such as dreams and mythic traditions passed down to us from many different civilizations over thousands of years. What kind of tale did Jung come up with? What image did he present to us? What Jung thinks about death? First, as previously stated, Jung acknowledges that death is a mystery that we cannot fully comprehend, define, explain, or imagine. Death raises a question that we are unable to answer, but despite the annoyance, we must attempt to deal with it. Why? Not having done so is a critical loss, Jung responds. For the question, is humanity's age-old heritage, an archetype rich with secret life that tries to join itself to our own unique life in order to complete it? Death is an archetype, one of the many experiences we all share, such as birth, growth, creation, and aging. It has intent as an archetype, which means it wants something from us. It aims to elicit behaviors. What do you mean? Reflection, introspection, a turning inward, tending to our soul, enjoying things psychic, such as dreams and intuitions, and a deepening of our love of mystery are all part of the process. Death challenges us to integrate more of reality inside ourselves, including that portion of ourselves that lives outside of space and time. It attempts to improve and complete individual lives in this way. Death also causes us to become more self-aware, to develop more consciousness. Death wants us to utilize it as a prod to reach our full potential. Jung had a near-death experience in which he saw what he had been and what he had lived, and it was all a fait accompli. He also had no regrets. Jung emphasized the need of holding the tension of opposites in his essay on the concept of enantiodromia. Opposites can be present in both consciousness and the unconscious. As a result, if we have life, we must also have death. One of Jung's criticisms of modern American culture is its one-sidedness about this pair of opposites, with our near-full concentration on life and rejection of death. We must cultivate a society that recognizes death as one half of the soul's journey, as much a part of life as physical existence is. We don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to cultural growth. We can draw on the millennia-long experience of focusing on the soul that occurred during the Middle Ages, c. 500–1500 CE, when society was more attuned to intangible than tangible objects. A premium was placed on soul tending, and as part of this process, a body of literature on how to prepare for death evolved. Ars Boni Moriendi constituents. Ars Boni Moriendi, or The Art of Dying Well, was a renowned text in this category. It was written between 1415 and 1450 in the aftermath of the Black Plague, which killed 3/8 of Europe's population between 1348 and 1349. Death was a pervasive aspect of existence by the early 15th century, and anyone who rejected, avoided, or disregarded it was foolish indeed. In the view of the Church, such a person jeopardized his or her immortal soul. To avoid eternal damnation, an anonymous cleric drafted a statement outlining the norms and procedures of a good death as prescribed by the Church. The first of these is extremely similar to Jung's idea. Ars Boni Moriendi accepts that death has a positive side and is not to be feared. The other components reflect contemporary Christian teaching, how to avoid the temptations of despair, impatience, spiritual pride, avarice, and lack of faith. Calling the dying person to remember the consolation available through the redemptive power of Christ's love, urging the living person contemplating his/her demise to live in imitation of Christ's life, and providing rules of behavior for behavior at the bedside of the dying. Several of these elements are seen in Jung's thought. For example, Jung recognized the importance of pistis, which is commonly translated as faith in the New Testament, but according to Jung, actually means trust. According to Jung, it is critical for a person to establish trust in the psyche over the course of his or her life. That we shall meet multiple occasions in life when our faith will be tested, when we will be tempted by the very real powers of evil, was a truth Jung seen in the lives of his patients and experienced himself. Jung was familiar with the medieval literature De Imitatione Christi, which described how to mimic Christ's life. Imitating Christ in the Middle Ages meant seeking to imitate how Christ lived, to be like him in his activities. Jung had a different perspective on this. He claimed in his psychological commentary on the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation that the psyche contains riches enough without having to be primed from without, and we are capable of evolving out of ourselves with or without divine grace. If we truly want to imitate Jesus, to follow him, as he was continually asking his disciples to do, We must recognize, accept, and act on our distinctive uniqueness and individuate, rather than try to ape or imitate anybody else, including Jesus. Jung saw that Jesus never emulated anyone else. He was his own person, and he boldly lived out his destiny. To Jung, following Jesus does not imply attempting to imitate him, but rather attempting to realize as fully as possible our own unique potential. How to have a pleasant death. In the natural run of events, Jung believed, the duty of preparing for death would occur only after midlife, when the trajectory of life begins to flatten and the objective of life shifts from growth and development to senescence and decline. Jung prescribed a variety of exercises for persons aged 40 and up to prepare for the end of life. First and foremost, become more conscious by paying attention to dreams. Working with one's dreams is the most beneficial practice for gaining psychic insights. A systematic, persistent practice of dream tending might provide us clues to the myth we are living, which Jung felt was one of the most essential things we can know about ourselves. Dream work also promotes psychological growth and the development of a relationship with the self. Another action that promotes the ego-self relationship is the habit of holding opposites in tension until the third thing, or transcendent function, emerges. This is never simple or quick enough to satisfy the impatient ego. However, the discipline of waiting for inner conflict resolution fosters both trust in the self and an understanding for the psyche's timing. Dreaming, acting on their advice, acknowledging and respecting intuitions and synchronicities, and holding the tension of opposites all serve to modify the course of life through time. The ego recognizes its inferiority and surrenders to the self. A self-directed existence recognizes and works to actualize the individual's unique potentials. It individuates and so gains confidence in life, which translates into confidence in the face of death. Introversion, inner work, and self-directed activities are the components of the art of dying well from a Jungian perspective. Since none of us will get out of life alive, this art is one we would do well to cultivate.